Today's video is proudly sponsored by Linode. Linode has been doing cloud computing since 2003, which is actually before Amazon Web Services was even a thing. On Linode's platform, you can get your server up and running in minutes, and they include all the popular distributions such as Debian, Fedora, Ubuntu, and get this, even Arch Linux. And let's be honest, what could be better than a Linux-focused cloud server provider that lets you tell all of your friends, I run Arch? Linode has multiple server plans available to make any app scalable and flexible. You could use it to host a blog, a VPN server, a Minecraft server, and much more. In fact, Linode is the platform of choice to host the entire web presence of Learn Linux TV. In addition, Linode offers 24/7 365 support, regardless of plan size, so you can get help from a live person when you need it. New users can get started right now with $100 towards your new account, and I highly recommend you check them out because Linode is awesome. And now, let's get started with today's video. Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Learn Linux TV. In today's video, we're going to be checking out MAAS, Metal as a Service. MAAS is a very awesome utility that you can run on your network, and it makes it really simple to provision machines like workstations, servers, and things like that because you can PXE boot those instances right to MAAS, and then you can deploy Ubuntu to those instances directly. It's really awesome. So what I'm going to do is give you a few notes about how this particular video is laid out, and then from there, I'll show you the entire installation process, and we'll even deploy Ubuntu to an instance. So let's go ahead and get started. MAAS is awesome. I can't wait to get started. But before we do, there's a few notes that I'd like to go over, basically to let you guys know how this particular video is going to be structured. But first of all, what exactly is MAAS anyway? As you may or may not already know, MAAS stands for Metal as a Service. And MAAS makes it very easy to deploy Ubuntu instances. In addition to Ubuntu, you can also deploy CentOS and Windows as well, but those operating systems are beyond the scope of this particular video. MAAS also supports PXE booting as well, which is great. And I'll actually show you the process of PXE booting a machine later in this video, so you'll get a chance to see what that looks like. In this video, I'm actually going to use a notebook as the example computer that's going to be provisioned by MAAS, but MAAS is able to do more than just provision physical machines. For example, you can also use MAAS to deploy virtual machines, OpenStack, and much more. We're not going to go over those concepts in this video, but you will see the process of provisioning a notebook, and that's going to be pretty cool. Also, MAAS features an easy-to-use web UI, and you'll see that web UI later in this video. And in this video, I'm going to show you the process of creating a VLAN because the style that I'm going to show you is going to have MAAS in a segregated VLAN away from the rest of the network, and I'll show you the process of setting up a VLAN, at least on my hardware. Also in this video, I'm going to show you the installation process for MAAS. We're going to set up our very own server. And after I set that up, I'm going to PXE boot a notebook so you can see what that process looks like. And then I'm going to have MAAS wipe the notebook and install Ubuntu. Now, if you're using a physical server, the process is going to be the same. I had a notebook lying around the office. I figured, why not? So I decided to use that. But if you're not planning on deploying notebooks with MAAS, you could just basically think of the notebook as a server. It's pretty much the same difference. And here's some additional notes about the layout for this video. For the method that I'll be using, you'll need network hardware that supports VLANs. In my case, I'll show you the process of setting up pfSense and UniFi for the purposes of MAAS. So basically, I'll create a VLAN in pfSense. I'll also set up that VLAN in UniFi, and that's going to be the VLAN that MAAS will be using. Now, if you use different hardware, the process for setting up VLANs is going to be different on your end. There's countless switches and pieces of hardware out there. There's no way that I can show you the process on every piece of hardware. So if you're using equipment that's different than mine, then in that case, you'll have to use the documentation that came with your hardware and translate what I'm doing to how you do that on your hardware. I would love to show you the process for every single piece of hardware out there, but honestly, that's impossible. And here's a quick diagram that shows you how I plan on setting up MAAS on my network. So obviously we have the internet right here. So that could be your cable modem or something like that. And again, I use pfSense as my firewall/router. So I'm going to be setting up VLAN 900 over here on pfSense. And that VLAN will be used specifically for PXE booting. And then here I have a UniFi switch. So what I'm going to do is configure a port to use VLAN 900. And that's the port that this MAAS server will be plugged into. And then using the MAAS server, I'll be setting up a laptop. Now the reason why I'm going to be doing it this way is because on my network, pfSense is actually responsible for DHCP. Whenever something in my rack requests an IP address, it's going to actually get an IP address from pfSense. So all the servers here are going to talk to pfSense to get an IP address. Now a lot of people will probably want to know, why are you using DHCP for servers and not a static IP? Well, actually everything here uses a static lease, aka DHCP reservations, and that's what I prefer. So pfSense has a list of all of my servers and knows what IP address they're supposed to have. Since I configure these with static leases, the IP addresses never change. So anytime one of these servers boots up, it's going to go through the switch to pfSense, it's going to get an IP address, and then pfSense replies and gives the server an IP address. Now, in this case, I really don't want this particular VLAN, VLAN 900, to have DHCP from pfSense. I want anything that I plug into the MAAS server to boot via PXE booting. So for this particular VLAN, what I'm going to do is disable DHCP. So here in pfSense, I'm basically not going to configure a DHCP server for VLAN 900. As a consequence of that, I do have to set up a static IP for the MAAS server, and MAAS itself will issue an IP address to anything that connects to that VLAN, so that means the MAAS server will be responsible for DHCP on that VLAN. Now technically this laptop is actually plugged into the switch, but I actually show it routing through MAAS only because it's using the same VLAN, but technically there's going to be two ports here on the same VLAN, one for MAAS and then one for the laptop that I'm going to be configuring. So what exactly are the requirements for installing MAAS? First of all, you're going to need VLAN capable hardware. Technically, you could probably install MAAS without this. There's different ways that you can integrate it into your network, but the method that I'm going to be using is going to be taking advantage of VLANs. Also, you'll need a server with at least 2 GB of RAM. Of course, 4 GB or more are recommended, but 2 gigs is pretty much the minimum. And if I add up all of the storage requirements that's listed on the MAAS website, it recommends about 50 GB of storage. I really don't think you're going to need 50 GB of storage though. I mean, after you download more images and things like that, it might actually grow to be that size. But at the end of the day, 50 GB is probably fine, and you could probably get away with less than that, but I'm just going off the recommendations that are listed on the MAAS documentation page, and that's what I came up with. As for the server, I do recommend that you use a physical machine, although it's entirely possible to use a virtual machine if that's what you have access to. In that case, if you're going to use my method, you'll have to make sure that your virtual machine solution supports VLANs. Reason being, the method that I'll be using will be taking advantage of VLANs. Now, with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, in order to install MAAS, what we're going to have to do is set up our networking first. So what I have here in my browser is my pfSense installation. What I'm going to be doing right now is setting up a VLAN for MAAS. I want it to run in its own VLAN, its own subnet. I basically want it to be separate from all the other networks that I have here in the studio. Now, if you are ever curious what kinds of VLANs I have here in the studio, then you are getting a look at that right here. This is actually my production pfSense server, and the VLAN that I'm going to be creating is going to be a VLAN that I'll be using going forward. So even though this video is just a tutorial and I have a demo server that I'll be using for MAAS, I'm going to be using this particular VLAN going forward, so this is going to be a permanent addition to my pfSense installation. What we're going to do is we're going to click on VLANs, and I want to add a new VLAN. For the parent interface, what I want to do is actually choose the LAN interface. I don't want the MAAS server to be publicly available. This is going to be used within my LAN to actually provision servers, so I really don't want this to be accessible from the outside. So I'll select LAN. And then for the VLAN tag, we need to come up with a number that's not already in use. I'll choose 900 for mine. because that's definitely going to stand out. It's a lot higher than any other VLAN tag that I have, so I'll just choose 900 for that. For the description, I'll type PXE. This is going to be used for PXE booting, and I'll click Save. So here at the bottom, we can see the new PXE VLAN that I've just created with the VLAN tag of 900, just like you see here. But we're not quite done yet. Even though we've created the VLAN, we actually have to put it to use. Just simply having the VLAN in pfSense isn't enough. We have to actually assign it. And to do that, I'll go here to Interface Assignments. Anyway, I was able to get to this particular menu by clicking Interfaces, and then going here to Assignments. That's how I got to this particular page. And this is the page that shows all of the VLANs that I currently have configured. Now, if we scroll down, we have a section here that says Available Network Ports. What we want to do is drop this down. And as you can see, the new VLAN is right here on the list. So what I'm going to do is click on it, and then I'll click Add. So I'll scroll down, and we can see that the new interface has been added. It's been given a default name though that I don't really like. So what I'm going to do is click on this right here where it shows opt 8. Obviously the number will be different for you, but I'll just click on it right here. We need to enable it, very important. And for the description, I'm going to call it, you guessed it, PXE or PXE. For the IPv4 configuration type, we're going to set it to static IPv4. And then for the IP address, what we're going to do is give it a subnet that's not currently in use. And for mine, what I'm going to do is set it to 192.168.200.1. And I'm going to set it to /24. And that should be all for this. So I'll scroll down. Let's go ahead and save it. Let's apply the changes. And then if we go to Interfaces and then Assignments yet again, instead of showing opt 8, it's showing PXE for the name. Just want to make sure that everything is consistent, and now it is. So as far as pfSense is concerned, there is one more step. We need to go up here to Firewall. We're going to go to Rules. We basically want to allow the traffic that is coming out of this particular VLAN. So what we'll do is click on PXE right here. There's no rules currently. Let's go ahead and add one. Going to scroll down here. Make sure this says Pass. And then we're going to go down here for the protocol. We're going to set this to any. I'll just give it a little description there and click Save. We'll apply the changes, and that should be good. Now there's one more thing we should check. We should go to Services and then DHCP server. Each VLAN can have its own DHCP server. So what I'm going to do is click on PXE, and we're going to make sure that this is not enabled. The MAAS server is actually going to be the DHCP server for this network, so we really don't need our router, our firewall, or whatever it is you're using to control DHCP. We want to give that control over to MAAS. So as far as pfSense is concerned, we're all set here. So the next thing that we need to do is actually configure our switch to understand that VLAN, to be aware of it, basically. And I've already pulled up mine. I am using UniFi on my end. So if you are using something else for your switch, just make sure that you actually configure it similar to how I'm configuring mine. There's probably thousands of different hardware configurations or more that you could have. There's no way that I could show you all of them. But basically what we're going to be doing is adding the VLAN tag of 900 here to our switch. So that way, the entire network is aware of that VLAN ID. In my case, I'm going to click on Settings. And then I'm going to go to Networks. And then here we have all of the different VLAN tags that I've already created. So what I'm going to do is create a new network. I'll name it PXE, just like I did in pfSense. We're going to set it to VLAN only. That disables the majority of the configuration here. We don't really need to configure anything. All we need to do is just make the switch aware of that VLAN ID. That's it. So we'll type that in right here. Make sure to use the same VLAN ID that you used in your router or switch. And then we'll click Save. And that's it. So now what UniFi is going to do is roll out this VLAN ID to all of my equipment, which actually takes less than a minute in my case. So when it comes to configuring the network, I'm all set on my end, so we can go ahead and move on and install Ubuntu Server. And what you're seeing on your screen right now is my TinyPilot KVM. This is something that I've reviewed in a previous video. I'll leave a card for that right about here. And TinyPilot is pretty awesome. It's a really cool KVM solution. I highly recommend it. And I'm using it in my case because this particular server doesn't have an HTML5 console that I can use via the web browser. So the TinyPilot effectively gives me the same thing. Now, speaking of server, I'm actually using a server that was provided to me by Tom Lawrence, who donated this server to the channel to help me create tutorials for you guys. Definitely check out his channel, it's awesome. I'll put a link to it down below in the description, so be sure to check it out, especially if you love networking, storage, and virtualization hardware. He has a ton of videos about that stuff. Anyway, as you can see here, I went ahead and powered on my server. In my case, I pressed F11 to access the boot menu. I've already created a bootable flash drive for Ubuntu Server. So if you don't already know how to do that, I have an entire video that shows you how to create bootable media from ISO images. But basically what you do is you just go ahead and use something like USB Imager that'll help you convert your flash drive into bootable installation media for Ubuntu Server, and then you can get started. So what I'm going to do is boot from the flash drive. It has a very strange name, but anyway, I'll press enter on that. And that'll start the installer for Ubuntu Server. And as you can see here, the Ubuntu Server installer has started and it's ready to go. Now, if you weren't already aware, I have a brand new book out that covers Ubuntu Server 2004. It covers it in great detail and I highly recommend you check it out. Go to ubuntuserverbook.com if you want to go ahead and snag a copy for yourself. But anyway, let's go ahead and get the installation started. So here I'm just going to press enter because the default of English as far as the language is concerned is correct. And the keyboard settings are correct as well. And this KVM can be a little large at times, so we have the done button down here. So this is a little larger than my browser is. So since we have done highlighted here, I'll press enter. Okay, so right here we have our primary Ethernet interface. And as you can see, it was able to get a DHCP address, which actually means that I didn't configure the switch port that this particular server is plugged into to be using the new VLAN that we've just created. So I'll go ahead and fix that, and I'll be right back. Alright, so now that that's taken care of, what I'm going to do is go ahead and configure this Ethernet interface right here to use a static IP rather than DHCP. Earlier, we made sure to not enable the DHCP server for this VLAN. So if I don't configure it to use a static IP, then, well, it's not going to have any connectivity at all. So I'll press enter. Then we'll go down to edit IPv4. So next what I'll do is press enter right here where it shows automatic. And I'll change it to manual. Then for the subnet, what I'm going to do is type 192.168, then .200.0/24. And the reason why I typed .0 instead of .1 is because this is actually asking for the network subnet, not the IP address. So in networking, when we're referring to the entire subnet, we refer to it as .0/24, at least in the case of this particular network. That's beyond the scope of this video. Now for the IP address, I'll give it 192.168.200.2. And the reason why I didn't give it .1 is because if you recall, .1 is the default gateway. That's the IP address that we designated as the default gateway when we created the VLAN in pfSense. So since we've already used that particular IP address and it is the default gateway, we can't use it as the IP address of our MAAS server. So I just gave it the next available IP, which is going to be 192.168.200.2, and that should work out great for what we need today. For the gateway, like I just mentioned, it's 192.168.200.1. That's going to allow this MAAS server to route back to pfSense and actually access the internet. So that should work out for that. And then for the name server, I'm going to set that also to 192.168.200.1. My pfSense server is also a DNS server, so it'll use the same address for this. And my local network here is actually home-network.io. So basically, on your end, you'll just fill out all of these fields with all of the values that are specific to your network. You can use the same values that I'm using here if you want to, and if those values don't collide with anything else that you have in your LAN. But once you have all of this filled out, we'll go down here to save, we'll press enter. And it looks like that's done, so let's just go ahead and navigate to the bottom. Make sure we choose done, I'll press enter. For the proxy, I'll just press enter. And for the mirror, the default is fine for that as well. I'm going to use the entire disk. This will blow out everything on the disk, so just make sure that you're choosing a disk that has absolutely nothing on it that you care about. And what I'm going to do is allow it to claim my SATA DOM, which is what this is right here. If you'd like to choose a different disk, but you can highlight the selection, press enter, and you'll get a list of all the storage devices that exist on your server. I'm going to go ahead and leave it on the default. It actually chose the correct one automatically, which is pretty cool. So we'll go down here to the bottom, choose done. So at this point, it's giving us a quick summary right here of all the partitions that it wants to create. So what I'll do is just select done yet again. And then I'll go down to continue. Yes, I am sure I want to wipe out the disk. That is totally fine. And then here we get to fill out the information for the primary admin user. I'll just keep mine simple. I'll call mine MAAS. For the username, I'll keep that simple as well. Same for the password. Should be good to go. So here we have an option to install the OpenSSH server, and I do recommend you do that. If you press the space bar, that's going to put a little X there in the box. That means that we've selected that particular option. We do want that. If you do have an SSH key that you have hosted online, you can import that here. It's a bit beyond the scope though. I just want you guys to be aware that that is a possibility. Anyway, scroll down here to the bottom and select done. So here on this menu, we have various things that we can have pre-configured for our Ubuntu server if we'd like, but I'm going to ignore these. And we won't be selecting any of these. I'm sure they're very useful, but they're beyond the scope for this particular video. So I'll press enter on done. So up here it shows that the installation is complete. So what we're going to do is go down here to reboot, and we'll press enter. So the server has finished rebooting and it's ready to go. So now I'm here at my terminal ready to SSH into the server and start the next step. So what we're going to do in this section of the video is actually install MAAS. So next what I'm going to do is use SSH to connect to the server. And we're in. Now, although it's optional, I highly recommend that we do everything from within tmux. tmux is a terminal multiplexer that allows you to keep everything running even if you lose your connection. Losing your connection in the middle of a package operation, for example, that would be really bad. But if we're running everything within tmux and we lose our connection, no worries, because tmux keeps everything running and we could reestablish our session when we reconnect. Again, tmux is completely optional. I just think it's a really good habit to get into when you're performing maintenance on a server. So I'll type which and then tmux to see if we already have it installed. And we do, at least in my case. If you don't see any output here, that means that you don't have tmux on your server. If you don't have it installed already, then what you could do is run sudo apt install and then tmux, and that'll get it installed. But I don't need to do that since I already have it installed. So I'll simply run tmux just like this. And now tmux is activated. You can tell that it's activated because we have this green footer down here at the bottom of the terminal window. But don't worry so much about how tmux works. I have a complete tutorial series that goes over tmux if you're interested. But for the purposes of this video, we're only using tmux to keep our session alive if something was to happen to our connection. So just simply having it running is good enough for us. So next, let's go ahead and update our package sources. So I'll run sudo apt update, and this will help us make sure that our local index is up to date. And right here, we can see that we have 14 packages that can be upgraded. So we should go ahead and take care of that. So for that, I'll run sudo apt and then dist-upgrade, just like that. I'll press enter again. And now at this point, we have every package updated on our server. So what I'm going to do is run sudo reboot. We want to make sure that we're running all the latest updates. So I'll press enter, and then I'll give it a few minutes to reboot, and then I'll be right back. All right, so I think enough time has passed. The server should be up and running by now. So let's try to reconnect. And there we go. So now that we have every package updated, let's go ahead and install MAAS. And that's actually the easiest part of this entire video. We simply run sudo apt install and then MAAS, just like that. And for this message right here, we could safely ignore it. I'll press tab. That puts the selection on OK. I'll press enter. And that's all there is to it. And before I get too much further, I'll make sure that I have tmux activated. Again, it's not required, it's just a precaution. But anyway, we have MAAS installed, so now we can go ahead and initialize it. So for that, we'll run sudo MAAS init, just like this. I'll type in my super secret password. Preferably, I'll type it correctly. For the region, I'm going to select all, and that's actually the default anyway, so I'll simply press enter. For the URL, I'm going to leave that at its default as well. Just make a mental note that MAAS runs on port 5240 by default, and the URL that you see on the screen right now is actually the URL that you'll use to access this in your web browser. Anyway, I'll press enter. So next, I'm going to set the username for the admin user that'll be used to configure MAAS. I'll just set mine to J, simple enough. And for the password, I'll go ahead and type that in right now. And again. For the email, you actually will want to fill this in. If you try to press enter and skip this, at least in my experience, it won't create the user. So I'm just going to type this email right here. We have to put something in this field. I'll press enter. And for the SSH keys, I'm not going to do that. I'll just press enter to bypass this particular prompt. And that should be it. MAAS should be installed and ready to go right now. All we had to do was install the package and do the initialization, which we've done. So now it's time to log in. So I'll open up Firefox here. Type in the IP address of the MAAS server. And it's running on port 5240, then slash MAAS in all caps. So here we have the login screen. So what we'll do is enter the user info right here, the same user info that we entered in during the initialization process. So I've typed in my username, and now I'll type in the password. Since this is the first time that we've ever logged into MAAS on the server, we have some configuration to go through here. So for the DNS forwarder, I'm just going to set it to Google's DNS. You could use whatever you'd like for this. Doesn't really matter. It just has to be a valid DNS server. And this particular DNS forwarder is going to be where MAAS sends its external DNS lookup requests. So I think Google is probably good enough for now. I'm going to leave all of this at its default. And in this section right here, what we're going to do is choose which images we want to have installed and ready to go. In my case, I'm going to make sure to select 2004, as you see here, and then I'll click Update Selection. And the images that you've selected should immediately start downloading. So what I'm going to do is just let it set on this screen, and then I'll be right back as soon as it's finished. So as you can see here, both of these images were downloaded and they've already synced. It took quite a bit of time on my end because I was actually using a USB Ethernet adapter, long story. But downloading images in MAAS is one of those things that can take a bit of time, so it is what it is. So I'll scroll down here to the bottom, and I'll click Continue. So down here, it's telling me that MAAS has been successfully set up. And according to this, once I enable DHCP, I should be able to PXE boot servers and get them bootstrapped, which is pretty cool. So I'll scroll back up. I'm going to skip this section here. And here we are on the dashboard. So the next thing we'll want to do is enable DHCP. So I'll click on Subnets. And right here it's telling me that DHCP is not enabled on any VLAN. And I already knew that, so I'll dismiss this. And right here I'm going to click on Non-Tagged underneath VLAN for the network that we're using. And we know this is the correct one because it has the subnet right here. So I'll click on it. And then I'll scroll down here and we have a button that says Enable DHCP. So I'll click that. And it's going to give us a default range right here. In my case, IP addresses that are served via DHCP from MAAS are going to end in 191 through 254. You can change that if you want to go ahead and narrow that down or widen it up. It's up to you. But anyway, I'll click Configure DHCP. And now that's enabled. So what I'm going to do at this point is switch the screen recorder over to a laptop that I'm going to use as if it were a server. What I'll do specifically is I'll attempt to PXE boot the laptop. And if all goes well, I should be able to deploy an Ubuntu image onto the laptop. So what I have here on the screen is actually the boot menu of my Latitude E6430 laptop. This particular laptop is quite old, but it's still a good one. And I'm just going to use it as if it was a server. So what I'm going to do is attempt to PXE boot it. So I'm going to scroll down here, and let's attempt to boot via the onboard NIC, IPv4 specifically. I'll press enter. Wow, would you look at that? It's actually downloading the netboot image right now. And as you can see, it's booting under MAAS. And check this out. We actually have the laptop right here. It gave it a random name, an interesting name at that. Almost looks like an Ubuntu release name. So that means our server, well in my case, laptop, was able to PXE boot into MAAS, and it's right here, ready to go. Well actually, it's not quite ready to go yet. What we're going to need to do is actually deploy Ubuntu to it, because that doesn't automatically happen. Right now it's commissioning, and MAAS is basically taking an inventory of the machine. It'll probably have some of the info already if I click on it. And it does, so we can see what kind of CPU is on this machine, how many cores we have, storage. We have all kinds of information here about this particular machine. So now the status changed to new, and the laptop has shut down. And that's normal. Essentially what happens the first time is that the machine boots via MAAS. MAAS takes an inventory of it and then shuts it down. And now that MAAS is aware of this particular machine, we can go ahead and deploy Ubuntu to it. But first of all, what we'll need to do is click on Configuration. And we need to select a power type. What I'm going to do is choose Manual. But if you're using a specific type of hardware that matches a power configuration on this list, you could choose that instead. But in my case, I'm going to choose Manual. What that means is that power control is actually going to be up to me because manual means, well, manual. MAAS will not be able to automatically configure power up or power down on that particular machine. That's okay in my case because it's just a laptop anyway, so I'll click Save Changes. So next I'll click on Machines. You see the machine right here. So what I'm going to do right now is power on the laptop. I'm going to PXE boot it yet again. All right, so it's booting right now. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and click Take Action, and we'll commission the machine. I'm going to remove this test right here. We don't need to do that. That's just going to add additional time. We simply want to make sure that MAAS is able to control and adopt this machine. So I'll click Commission One Machine. And off camera, I'm basically going to PXE boot the machine again, just like I did before. And now it's net booting. It should show as available here in MAAS pretty soon. We can see that the status changed to performing PXE boot, as you can see here. So right now it's just gathering information, so I'm going to let this run, and then I'll come back and we can go ahead and proceed to the next step. All right, the status changed to ready. So I'm going to click on Take Action. I'll click Deploy, and I'll leave it on the default here for Ubuntu 20.04. And actually down here it's giving me a warning that login will not be possible, apparently, because SSH keys have not been added to the machine. So let me go ahead and click on that. So what I'm going to do is just click on my name right here. And I'll click on SSH keys. And I'll go over here to my terminal. And since I don't already have an SSH key on this system, I'll just generate one right now. If you already have an SSH key, you can skip this step. I'll simply run SSH keygen, just like that. I'll press enter to select the default path. Enter again for no passphrase. A passphrase is actually recommended, but I'm just going to keep it simple for this video. I'll press enter. Enter again. That should be all there is to it. Next, I'll just type cat and then the tilde for the home directory, then .sh/id_rsa.pub. We want to cat out the public key, and I'm going to copy all of this text right here. And then back in the browser, I'm going to import an SSH key. I just click upload. I'll paste it right here. I'll click import. And right here it says that the key was successfully imported. So back in machines, I'll click on this one right here. I'll click deploy. And again, we're going to deploy Ubuntu 20.04. I'll click deploy again. And then next, what I'm going to do is start the laptop. I'm going to PXE boot it yet again. And now we're booting over PXE boot, so this should be fun. Let's see what happens. Now we're fetching the netboot image. So far, so good. All right, so now the status has changed to installing OS. That's a great sign. As you can see, it's booting right now. We have all this scrolling text all over the screen. That's a really great sign. And now we have the login screen. And since we deployed Ubuntu server to the laptop, there's going to be no GUI as of yet. But as you can see right here, we have the login screen, so that means it's working. So what I'm going to do is just use SSH to connect to that machine. I want to show you guys how to SSH into an Ubuntu machine that was configured via MAAS. The username by default is Ubuntu. And then we type in the IP address. If you don't know what the IP address is, you can get it from MAAS. So I'll type that in right now. It was given 192.168.200.4. So I'll press enter. And as you can see, I was able to log in. How cool is this? We've successfully used MAAS to deploy Ubuntu server over to a laptop, which is a great proof of concept because it doesn't matter what kind of hardware it actually is. Again, whether it's a laptop, a desktop, a physical server, virtual machines even, MAAS is able to configure all of those and more. But as you can see, the process was a success. We deployed Ubuntu, so we're good to go. So there you go. As you can see, MAAS is awesome. And I had a lot of fun making this video for you guys. I've actually been wanting to do this video for quite some time now, and I'm glad that I finally got the chance to do so. So what did you think about this video, or MAAS in general? Let me know down in the comments below. I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say. If you like this video, please click that like button, and also subscribe if you haven't already done so, because I have some awesome content coming very soon. Thanks for watching.